Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Good. Well, it's wonderful to see everyone here. I'm much happier to be here because all morning I was at the Riverside County Courthouse for jury duty. And so I did my civic duty for the year, and I'm grateful to everyone that does that, but I'm very happy to be back here to listen to this presentation instead of whatever that case was going to be. So, welcome. My name's TJ. I'm the program coordinator. It's great to see you all. We're really happy to have Dr. Ed Gordon back today. Before I introduce him, though, I just wanted to take a moment to thank the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory Foundation, which is how we fund all of our programming. And if that's something that you want to get involved with or easily make a donation to, you can just visit our website. And it's easy to do, and it's how we do all of these great programs that we do here at the library. It's also how we pay for our collections development, so actually buying new books and the subscriptions that we have and the services that we offer online. So the foundation is a really important part of what we do. I also wanted to remind everybody that we've still got a lot of great programs coming up this season. Next Tuesday, we have Andrew McCarthy. He's an amazing author, but a lot of people know him from the Brat Pack from the 1980s. He was one of the stars of a lot of those really, really popular films. And now he's gone on to write a lot of great books and travel books. He's going to be speaking about his new book about male friendships, actually. And that's going to be on Tuesday as part of our Rancho Mirage Writers Festival Writers Series. That actually will be at 2 p.m., but I do recommend, if you're interested, get here early. We expect we're going to have a big audience. That's going to be at one of our premier programs. But the first 200 people into the room will receive a free copy of his book. And then next Wednesday night, we have the Palm Springs Gay Men's Chorus back again this year, so we're looking forward to that. So, and then a lot more coming up. So check out our program guide, and before too long, we'll be getting out our summer information for our kids' summer reading and everything as well. So all year round, we stay busy. But now on to today's program. If you haven't had a chance yet, make sure you just take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phone. But it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ed Gordon back to the Rancho Mirage Library for the 5th year. He is an internationally recognized historian, speaker, and author. His 20 books have been translated into 5 languages and are held in over 9,000 libraries throughout the world. Dr. Gordon taught at DePaul University, Loyola, and Northwestern universities in Chicago. He has presented hundreds of historical programs across America at museums, universities, and libraries, and to a wide variety of organizations and associations. He has been a speaker at the Palm Springs Air Museum, the Coachella Valley Society for International Relations, and many other venues in the Coachella Valley for the past 13 years. Ed has appeared on CBS Network's The Early Show, CNN, the PBS NewsHour, National Public Radio, and many other media venues. Dr. Gordon earned his BA and MA degrees in history at DePaul University, Chicago, and his PhD at Loyola University, Chicago, and pursued postgraduate studies at the University of Chicago. And I think in total he's done 7 programs here, actually, since 2014. So we're just so happy to have him back. And he's a great speaker on so many different subjects, from the story of the California missions to anyone that was here last year might remember he talked about the end of Hitler's Europe, the last 100 days. So it's great to have somebody with such a broad knowledge of so many studies, of so many things in the field of history. So we're just really happy to have him back today. So he's been coming here since 1982 as a snowbird, and hopefully he'll stop back again and see us next year as well. Ed and his wife Elaine stay in Chicago the rest of the year, but now they're here. So welcome to the stage, Dr. Ed Gordon.
And I'm happy to be here and not in Chicago in the winter, usually, particularly when it's not 100 degrees. Today we're going to talk about a saga of the American West during the 1800s. This story is marked by exploration, exploitation, settlement and displacement, audacity and greed. Well, here is our agenda. These are the trail markers we'll take in this journey through America's Western history of the 19th century. One of the chief reasons that America expanded was the financing that Napoleon Bonaparte needed for his wars in Europe. He approached Thomas Jefferson in 1803 to sell to the United States, the Louisiana Territory. This was for only $12 million. That comes to 3 cents an acre. This more than doubled the size of the United States, and it gave an opportunity to find an all-water route to the Pacific to increase trade. Now, President Jefferson chose his secretary, who's their Meriwether Lewis, and secondly, William Clark, an Army officer, to lead this expedition to map and to claim the territory and explore it for the United States. Now, here's a map of their unprecedented and fundamentally significant 2-year exploration of the West. This journey into the unknown overcame many dangers and unprecedented obstacles, since no one had ever done this before. And this was a round trip to the coast and back. The Blackfoot Native American woman, Jedediah, also was instrumental in this expedition's survival and final success. If you are interested in this, read Stephen Ambrose's book on Undaunted Courage. And Ken Birds did a wonderful PBS series program that you can see if you subscribe to PBS locally. The richness of that country led John Coulter, who was a member of their expedition, to start trapping furs. They were in great demand for garments at that time. In 1806, he and Manuel Lisa were the first whites to see Yellowstone National Park, which again was then, he called it Coulter's Hell because of all of the thermals. And of course, Jackson Hole. How many of you have been in Jackson Hole and Yellowstone? All right. Now others would follow. Kit Carson, Jedediah Smith, William Sublette, and many other bold adventurers. Earlier, as Daniel Boone had discovered the Kentucky Gateway, the Cumberland Gap, that my wife and I have been to, in 1812 they discovered South Pass. This is a gateway to the western United States and would be used by hundreds of thousands of immigrants. By 1822, William Ashley, who was another trapper, placed an ad in a St. Louis newspaper. It said, "Join me in the fur trade adventure. The era of the mountain men was then born." Well, who were these men? Well, they were tough people. They were part savage. They were part hero. They were known for their love of solitude. They had great survival skills and friendship with each other. And mostly they were illiterate, but many of them spoke several European languages and native dialects. Jim Bridger, at age 18, answered the call to become a mountain man. He was one of the greatest of all that breed. He also explored the Yellowstone Basin and ran trapping lines for many years in the West. He also was known for his tall tales, which he liked to give to the greenhorns, all of you guys out there. I was once chased by 100 Cheyenne Indians for 2 days. I ended up in a box canyon. And the greenhorn asked him, "Well, what happened?" He said, "They killed me." This is a map of the three-corner area of Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah that was prime beaver country. Why did these men go after beavers to trap? What was the value in this? Well, at that time in the East, there was a great demand by men to wear beaver dress hats. Now, Native Americans in the Rocky Mountains bitterly contested these men because they were in competition with the mountain men. The beaver was very valuable for them for trade. They used it in order to get their necessities, knives, blankets, guns, etc. and the mountain men were often, therefore, attacked and killed for these pelts and driven away from the beaver streams. At the same time, many of them had great friends among members of different native tribes. They had peaceful relations, and some of them intermarried with Native American women. Well, these trappers often worked in small teams out in the mountains and for rival trading companies. Also, most of them got arthritis, because as you can imagine, wading into a mountain stream that's ice cold, that's where all the beavers were. Here are some of the companies, Canadian and American outfits. There were at times very bitter rivals. All of you Canadians can leave now. They were several ways to deliver their trapped furs without a long haul back to Montreal or to St. Louis. Here's one of the alternatives, and it is shown here on this map. These were trading posts. They were scattered across the northern and southern plains. Now, pictured here is a famous trading post, Fort Laramie. Here, the trappers and Native Americans would trade for supplies. And these posts were run by the fur companies, and later some of them became U.S. Army outposts. And you can visit. Right now, you can go to Fort Laramie and see some of the remaining structures. Pictured here near Santa Fe is Brent's Fort. These were adobe post stockaded and was divided between an outer area where they would greet the people to trade and an inner area where they stored all the trade goods. These forts had an Indian village nearby usually. Now in 1825, William Ashley chose a site on the Green River where he made history because it became the site of the first rendezvous. Here he brought wagons for the first time over the Great Plains with trade goods. And at the rendezvous, they would trade with the trappers for their pelts. This is the Jackson Hole Rendezvous. It was a raucous trading brawl, horse races, card games, whiskey, and women, a three-ring circus. Both mountain men and Indians cut loose. By 1840, however, this era was at an end. What happened? Well, they were very efficient. There were hardly any beaver left. And at the same time, the beaver hat was replaced by felt hats in the East. Now, unfortunately, the mountain men never made any maps. This left the U.S. government up to them to send out mapping expeditions to the Great Plains and to the mountain areas. And one of those would be, as you see here, the Pike Peak expedition. Trappers were very often the guides for these expeditions since they knew the West so well. Now, Pike's Peak was 1806, 1807, and Jefferson authorized the government to explore the south and west of Louisiana, as Lewis and Clark had really gone to the northwest. This map, let's go back. This map shows where the route of his two expeditions in the southwest. Zebulon Pike's expedition was pivotal because he mapped that territory, he established diplomatic relations with Native American tribes, and he discovered natural resources. In 1806, he also discovered Pike's Peak near present Colorado Springs. How many of you have been up on Pike's Peak? Okay, well, you can drive up there over 14,000 feet, as I did with my wife. If you can do Highway 74, you can drive there. Or you can take the tram railroad. Now, in 1842, another Army officer, John Fremont, he led another expedition. Mountain men often became guides for his expedition as well. In fact, in this case, Kit Carson would be leading his expedition, and Kit Carson guided all of Fremont's expeditions. As you see, there were several. He really was the pathfinder of the West, not Fremont, because he guided all of them. Now, who was Kit Carson? Well, he was probably the greatest of all the mountain men. He was only 5'6" tall, thick-set, with light hair. He was very quiet and honest. He was an expert hunter, guide, trader, great horseman, crack shot, but he too was illiterate. Carson was strong, kind, and loyal, stealthy and fearless. At age 16, in 1826, he joined the first wagon caravan on the Santa Fe Trail. Yet only 3 years later, he would blaze the first overland trail to the California coast. That's what this is a picture of you're seeing. Now, Carson would later become famous because of Charles Averill. He wrote 70 novels based loosely on Carson's life. Averill portrayed Carson as the ultimate heroic Superman of the West, sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger, John Wayne, all rolled up into one. These books catapulted Carson into 19th century celebrity. Once on the Oregon Trail, when Carson was leading a group of settlers, one of them came up and he studied the short, squat mountain man. And then he said, "You know, you ain't the kind of Kit Carson I was looking for." Carson hated these books, and he never received 1 red cent from any of their publications. Now, Carson ultimately married a Native American woman and lived in Taos, New Mexico. And you can visit Carson's home and grave in Taos. Much later, in 1869, John Powell, a government explorer and topographer, led an expedition to the upper Colorado River. No one had ever taken the Colorado River its full length. No one knew what was there. He had been a friend of General Grant, and he had lost an arm in the Civil War at the Battle of Antietam in 1862. So in 1869, he led 10 men for 3 months on the first exploration of this mysterious, unexplored 300-mile length of the Grand Canyon. Have any of you done any whitewater river rafting in the Grand Canyon? Raise your hands. Yes, it can be very treacherous. Well, they traveled in what they called the Great Unknown. For days, their boats plunged through violent cataract falls, and they swamped many of their boats. The canyons rose a mile above them. On August 27th was the worst day. The river had falls of 20 feet at different cataracts, and the morale sank to a new low. That evening, 2 men decided to leave the expedition and climb out of the Grand Canyon. They never were seen again. Only 3 days later, on August 30th, they shot out of the Grand Canyon alive. In 1824, the Santa Fe Trail, we're going the wrong way, there we go. The Santa Fe Trail was first opened to the capital of New Mexico. After the 1820 Mexican Revolution overturned Spanish rule, the trail was opened to traders but not to settlers. By 1848, New Mexico was annexed to the United States as a result of the Mexican War. The Fremont Expedition Report was published in 1843. It intensified a growing interest in Western land and settlement. Oregon fever proved to be highly contagious. Even earlier, in 1836, Dr. Marcus Whitman, and Francis Parkman, the famous writer who wrote a book on the Oregon Trail, took the first wagon train to Walla Walla, Washington. Well, why would thousands of people leave their little farms in the Midwest and endure a 2,000-mile, 6-month journey to Oregon? Well, it was a dream of greater and better land, better climate, financial and romantic problems maybe at home, legal problems, and of course, there was the question of slavery that people were struggling with before the Civil War. Small parties at first traveled the trail, and the reports went home, and greater numbers followed. In the spring of 1843, the first truly great migration began. Oregon-bound wagon trains divided up into columns. This one had 5,000 head of oxen, horses, and cattle. They used oxen to pull the wagons. Those headed to California after the gold rush wanted to go faster. They used horses. In 1845, there was a migration of over 5,000 in a series of caravans. Well, what was life like on the great exodus to the west? How did they get there? Well, here it is, the Conestoga wagon, the SUV of the pioneers in the 19th century. It's named after the Conestoga River in Pennsylvania, where it was first built. Its first use was hauling freight, but it also proved durable for the immigration trails. Now, as you can see from this diagram cutout, it grew tremendously. You see in movies of the West 10, 15 wagons, and the Indians attack them. No, these are 1,000 wagons. 1,000 wagon train, one after the other after the other. How many of you have ever gone to Fort Kearny in Nebraska? That's where they would line up for the final leap into the plains, all right? Well, what caused most of the deaths on the trail? Well, these large-scale wagon trains, the Indians did not attack, the Native Americans did not attack these large trains. They were interested in stealing horses and cattle, and at night they would try to creep up and do this. What about disease, starvation, lack of water? No, it was drowning. Drowning? Well, you see, they had to cross a lot of rivers, and many of the Native Americans decided to make a little money on the side, so they put together rafts to float the wagons across. Well, now, if you're a thrifty farmer from Ohio or Illinois, you're not going to pay a toll to cross that river. Instead, you'll just cross it with your team. Well, guess what? Many never made it and they drowned. The discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 in California created a frenzy of people that want to go west. They came by sea, but most would travel across the west. The settlers came. There was nothing to stop any of them. They came for land, they came for gold, and they joined the ranks of other land-hungry people. First it was a trickle, then a torrent. The migration westward became the great phenomenon in American history, unique in numbers and distances. Over 300,000 pioneers would cross the prairies and mountains on the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Santa Fe Trails before the coming of the Transcontinental Railroad. For the most part, these were sturdy farming families. They came with a vision of long-term settlement and not for a quick buck in the gold fields. Well, in 1862, Abraham Lincoln made history because he signed the Homestead Act. This did two things. First, it authorized the Transcontinental Railroad to be built. And secondly was the Homestead Act, which gave farmland to settlers if they would plow and settle on a plot of land in the West. These two acts by the government propelled a tidal wave of new settlement, but it also doomed the Native American way of life across the Great Plains. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Congress authorized two railroads to be built, the Transcontinental Road across the U.S., the Union Pacific from the east across the Great Plains, and the Central Pacific across the Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains. On May 10, 1869, they met at Promontory Summit near Ogden and Salt Lake City, Utah. Leland Stanford, the president of the Central Pacific, drove in the golden spike that united America. You see him doing it. He missed. You can visit the national park that is there. It's very isolated, but it's well worth seeing. You can see 2 full-scale replicas of the 2 steam engines that did this, and you will look for the golden spike, and you can see its replica. The original is in the library at Stanford University. Railroads exploded then across America. Legislation gave railroads adjacent right-of-ways to start new towns and encourage farmers to settle nearby. The Homestead Act offered cheap land to settlers and immigrants that flooded into the West. As the railroads advanced westward with the aid of the land-grant settlement, the plains gradually progressed with this new pattern of settlement. For the railroad companies, it was important to import population along its right-of-ways. Well, here's pictured an immigrant family. A treeless plain, a sod house became a style of living. The strip was cut of sod into convenient lengths and laid like brick. Some of the prairie homes were neat, and others were just holes in the ground. They were well made and comfortable, or they were miserably made. They drove many pioneer housewives mad. Well, how did Native Americans respond to this relentless tidal wave of people into their plains? This is a map of Native American tribes across the United States, which did not exist in 1492. There were 5 million Native Americans spread across what is now the United States and parts of Canada. They were pushed further and further westward by swelling populations until they were across the Mississippi River, and many of those tribes then, with the horse, became the great raiders of the plains. Westward, as the immigrant population expanded, there were numerous conflicts. However, you must know that 80% of all the Native Americans throughout history died of infectious disease, not from being killed in a war. By 1890, the estimate of Native American population was only 340,000. Here's a map of 1840 of the Indian frontier. By 1852, 52 treaties gave up 13 million acres of land. Government policy was not to exterminate Native Americans or simply to seize Indian lands. Instead, it, quote, enlightened and refined, unquote, Indians. They wanted to lead them from savagery to Christianity, from hunter to gatherer, becoming a farmer, rather than killing the Indians. Civilized Indians would give up their land in treaties to the United States. That was the idea. However, Senator Stephen Douglas from Illinois said, quote, to those who argue for Indian treaty rights, he retorted, that you cannot fix boundaries on the western expansion of this great nation and growing country. You cannot fetter the limbs of this young giant, unquote. The Native American tribes of the Great Plains culture was defined by a hunter-gatherer warrior existence. How realistic were U.S. government plans to quickly turn them into farmers? Their very existence was supported by 20 to 50 million bison that roamed throughout the west of the Mississippi River. These countless numbers of buffalo provided them with food, clothing, and all the other essentials of life. White buffalo hunters began to drastically reduce these herds. With the coming of the railroads, these hunters would board a train and just go hunting and purposely shoot down as many buffalo as they can from moving cars, without regard of the pelt or the meat or anything else. They just wanted to kill the buffalo. These hunters were after, commercially, some of them were hunters, and they were after buffalo hides. at least 5,000 hunters and sportsmen steadily reduced the herds to, by 1890, only 1,000 buffalo were left. Over a 3-year period, the Santa Fe Railroad transported over 1 million pounds of bison bones that you see on that pile. In the 1870s, Kansas bone pickers earned over $2 million gathering buffalo bones. Full-scale wars between Native Americans and the U.S. Army were rare. Why? Well, the Indian warrior culture supported raids, but it was for individual bravery and wealth. They wanted to steal horses, take captives as slaves. Most raids were made on other tribal groups, not whites. No tribal group or alliance ever fully united, and the warriors to fight the government over a long time period. That was not their idea of warfare. Both white and Indian depredations happened throughout the history of the West. The Native American struggle was to keep the bison and elk hunting grounds from destruction. Treaties were often violated by whites over land or cattle or mining resources. Tribal chiefs did not have total control over their younger warriors who wanted to seek distinction of conducting raids. No tribal chief could speak for all the members of his tribe, but only for the band he represented. This made signing treaties futile, since many of the tribal bands weren't even at the signing. A good example of this is Black Kettle, one of the most famous chiefs of the Southern Cheyennes. He had tried to keep his people at peace with the invading whites. In 1864, he went to Denver and signed a treaty at a conference to bring his people to the big south bend of Sand Creek, 30 miles near Fort Lyon. To prove his loyalty to the United States, he mounted an American flag over his teepee. For no real reason other than hatred, a Colonel Shevington of the Colorado Volunteers attacked this camp in a surprise dawn raid on November 29, 1864. The indiscriminate slaughter of the surprised Cheyennes, men, women, and children, was so appalling that some of the most hard-bitten frontiersmen were disgusted. Kit Carson described the Sand Creek Massacre as a cold-blooded massacre. No one but a coward or a dog would have any part in it, he said. In the thick of battle, Black Kettle's wife was shot down. The U.S. Frontier Army in 1866 thus found itself in the dual role as a gatekeeper and the guardian of the Western population. They suddenly were delivered from the Civil War, and now they, in greatly reduced numbers, had to patrol a vast territory. During one 6-week period in 1866, more than 6,000 wagons passed through Fort Kearny, Nebraska, headed west. Indians signed treaties that fixed their reservation boundaries. Often the land given to them was barren, dry, and void of game. This was the first steps in what was gradually known as the policy of concentration. Once they would be in these reservations, the noble experiment would begin of converting Indians to become Christian farmers. Of course, because Indians were not interested in the blessings of the white man to be bestowed upon them, usually the concentrations led to some form of local conflict. Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce tribe told a great commissioner, "In the Treaty Council, the commissioners have claimed that our country has been sold to the government. Suppose a man should come to me and say, 'Joseph, I like your horse, and I want to buy it.' And I say to him, 'No, my horse is not for sale. I will not sell it.' My neighbor answers, 'Pay me money and I will sell you Joseph's horses.' Well, the white man turns around and says, 'Joseph, I have bought your horses, and you must now leave them to me.' If we sold our lands to the government, this is the way it was bought. The wars between Indian and government for the northern plains, the seat of the bloodiest and longest struggles, represented a displacement of one immigrant people, of Native Americans, driven from the eastern forests by another immigrant group of people from Europe or from eastern U.S. The whites were now coming in numbers that were incomprehensible to Native Americans. They assaulted Indian lands from every direction. In Western parlance, Indians who resisted the onslaught had to be rounded up and rendered harmless on reservation land too miserable to interest whites. It would be a great encirclement and a slow strangulation that would require 3 decades to choke the life out of these recalcitrant hunter-gatherer Indians. The hunter-gatherer culture versus the farmer culture versus miners, ranchers, etc., was going to disappear. Well, this all culminated in the famous story of the Little Bighorn Campaign, which you've seen in many movies on television and the theater. Look at the map. By treaty, 1876, the Great Sioux included the Black Hills of North Dakota. Gold was discovered in the Black Hills, and miners rushed in, and the Sioux attacked them. The U.S. government attempted to buy the Black Hills in a new treaty. The Sioux rejected the offer and began to leave the reservation to join Chief Sitting Bull and Red Cloud. The government ordered all the Sioux to return by January 31st, 1876, and they refused. Generals Crook, Gibson, Terry, with Custer, were then to converge on the Sioux-Cheyenne concentration camped at the Rosebud River. Crook fought and retreated before reaching the Rosebud. Gibbon's column was late in starting out. General Terry sent Custer's 7th Cavalry to scout out the Indian encampment. He would follow up with the infantry. He told Custer, "Don't attack until I get there." Custer didn't wait. He ignored the Indian scouts who went to the Rosebud and told him of a great concentration of 15,000 Sioux and Cheyenne, of which 5,000 were warriors. Custer had 700 cavalrymen. He divided them into 3 units to surround the encampment and prevent anyone from escaping. Well, this was a day-long engagement. Captain Benteen and Major Reno, who commanded the other units, they were driven back by large Indian concentrations to a combined hill defense and barely survived. Custer had only 269 officers and men, and he fought a running battle that culminated on a rise of ground where Custer's troops were surrounded. 5,000 versus 700. You can imagine what happened. They were wiped out to a man. You can visit today at the Little Bighorn National Monument and take a tour of the entire battlefield. My wife Elaine and I have done this. It's a very moving and interesting experience. Now, Sitting Bull and Red Cloud, this was a major victory, probably the greatest victory in the Western wars by Native Americans. But they were not prepared to fight a long-term campaign. Why? Well, you have 15,000 horses and people gathered. All the grass is eaten. All the game is shot. They had to split up into smaller bands. Also, too, winter was going to come on. They needed to stock up on supplies. So the U.S. Army mounted a winter campaign. They never fought in the winter. Those of you that live on the Great Plains, you know why they don't fight in the winter. And the Indians would basically go into winter quarters. Well, they had no food, they had very little ammunition, and they were forced to sign a new treaty in 1877 and relocate to the Indian Territory. Sitting Bull, fearing execution, fled with his band of Sioux to Canada. In 1880, with little food, he returned to the United States and surrendered. Now, here are 2 sidelights to the settlement of the West. It's fairly interesting. 186,000 African American soldiers fought in the Civil War. All of the black 9th and 10th Cavalry that fought on the plains, dubbed Buffalo Soldiers by Native Americans, fought in 177 engagements across the West. 18 of these soldiers were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Also, by 1870 and the 1880s, approximately 35 cowboys worked the plains, husbanding cattle on cattle drives, etc. A little known fact is as many as 25% of these were African American males. And now we come to the last phase of the West. William Cody, Buffalo Bill, was a highly regarded scout of the U.S. Army. Custer, Sheridan, and others held him in very high esteem for many years, his outstanding service on the Western frontier. In the 1880s, he developed a traveling program, Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show. It was a combination rodeo, had outdoor spectacle, sharpshooter Annie Oakley, historical pageants, the Deadwood Stage, Attack on the Settler's Cabin, the Pony Express, Custer's Last Stand. In 1885, Sitting Bull himself joined the roadshow with Annie Oakley. It was the show's most successful season. 1 million people across the United States and Europe came to these shows. He was so pleased with meeting Annie Oakley, he adopted her and called her Little Sure Shot. Cody defended Sitting Bull in the press over the Custer battle. Quote, "The defeat of Custer was not a massacre. The Indians were being pursued by skilled fighters with orders to kill them. For centuries, they had been hounded from the Atlantic to the Pacific and back again. They had their wives and little ones to protect, and they were fighting for their very existence. With the end of Custer, they considered that their greatest enemy had passed away. Sitting Bull was not the leader of the Sioux in the battle. He was a medicine man who played on their superstitions, their politician, their diplomat," unquote. The two old foes formed a bond of true friendship. It was a bold Cody to speak up so forcefully in the defense of his new friend just 9 years after Custer's last stand. Even as he celebrated the winning of the West, in his show, Cody came to understand that all had been lost in that great contest. The Wild West Show successfully toured Europe and toured across the United States from 1872 to 1916. Well, I have good news for you, because next to Yellowstone National Park is the Buffalo Bill Historic Center in Cody, Wyoming. Have any of you been there? Go. It's 5 modern museums. You buy a 2-day ticket. When my wife and Lane and I, we thought we'd just visit for a few hours. 2 days, we're not going to spend 2 days in this museum. Well, let me tell you what's there. First is a Wild West Show diorama and displays and artifacts of that whole shebang. Second, one of probably the greatest collection of Remington and Russell paintings on the American West, a separate museum. Third museum, a Settling of the West Museum. The fourth museum, a Native American museum. And a fifth museum, for those of you interested, are 25,000 firearms. There's also a huge research library of diaries, letters, and settler records from the Great Plains. To top it all off, Cody, Wyoming also features its own Wild West town of original structures gathered from across the Wild West that were transported there. I highly recommend a visit to Cody, Wyoming. This is a map of the Indian reservations across the American West in 1890. The Army's attack on the Ghost Dance at Wounded Knee killed many men, women, and children. It was a punctuation that ended the Native American West. The Ghost Dance promised the return of the buffalo, and all the whites would disappear. To stop the dance by the Sioux, the Army, fearing an uprising, killed many needlessly. It was a blatant example of Army incompetence by poorly led and prejudiced officers rather than a premeditated attack of cold-blooded murder. Sitting Bull, earlier that same day, was killed by his own Native American Sioux police that acted as police on that reservation. It appeared to be a knowing act by reservation officials who feared Sitting Bull's influence. Another sad example of good policy gone wrong was the forcible removal of 85% of all Native American Indian children to attend boarding schools, many times far removed from the plains. These children returned neither Indian nor white, alienated from both their parents and most not accepted by the whites themselves. A newspaper reporter once asked George Crook. Crook was one of the preeminent Indian fighting generals of the West, how he felt about what had happened. General Crook had led campaigns against the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Apache, and other tribes. Quote, "It was a hard thing," he said, quote, "to be forced to do battle with Indians who more often than not were in the right. I do not wonder, and you will not either, that when Indians see their wives and children starving and their last source of supplies cut off, they go to war. And then we're sent out there to kill them. It was an outrage." All the tribes tell the same story. They were surrounded on all sides. The game had been destroyed or driven away. They were left to starve. And there remains but one thing for them to do: fight while they can. Our treatment of the Indian was an outrage. Time and again, the Indian agents assigned to reservations were corrupt agents who stole the supplies from the Indians and other items to become rich on their own. When Grant appointed the Quakers to run the reservations, that continued the dishonesty and corruption. That a general would offer such a candid and forceful public defense of the Indians seems implausible, because it contradicts an enduring myth that the regular army was an implacable foe of the Indian. No epic in American history, in fact, is more deeply steeped in myth than the era of the Indian Wars of the American West. For 125 years, both popular and academic history, film, and fiction has depicted this period as the absolute struggle between good and evil, reversing the roles of hero and villains as necessary to accommodate a changing national conscience. Believe me, I have watched all of the John Ford movies, including Cheyenne Autumn, where he tried to tell the other side. If you want to see an early movie in the 1950s who attempted to change that, see the movie Broken Arrow. And you will see a very subtle difference, even though they're all white people starring as Indians, etc. Jimmy Stewart is the star of Broken Arrow. The record shows that there was not one West. There were many Wests. A young historian, Frederick Jackson Turner, addressed that very question in 1893 in his essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, which revolutionized the teaching of American history. American democracy, he said, was born of no theorist's dreams. Turner declared it came out of the American forest, and it gained new strength each time it touched a new frontier. It was the frontier that he characterized as the meeting point between savagery and civilization that explained the unique American character, a rejection of class and aristocracy, of established religion, standing armies, and the other trappings of Europe, in favor of adaptation, innovation, invention, individualism, and the rough-hewn democracy. The frontier was not only a process, it became a state of mind. Well, it certainly was a manifest destiny for many, but not for all. It was an end of an era for some, and an end to the way of life for Native Americans. A contemporary rebirth acknowledging Native and American culture has occurred in museums here in Palm Springs, Washington, Oklahoma, Cody, Wyoming, and elsewhere. Native Americans today make up about 2% of the total U.S. population. It is projected that by 2060, that may surpass 10 million people. There have been many changes that have taken place in the world of Native Americans. There has been a rising interest and pride among all tribes in the events of their past, have a right to be proud of their heritage. A determination to right just wrong, to resist any further encroachments upon their heritage is evident among many young Native Americans today. Some have struggled to educate themselves and learn new tools, the tools of law, education, economics, and politics to benefit their people. They have created remarkable bodies of art and literature about themselves, ranging from historical essays and current affairs. And today, they are striving to encourage better education among the reservations. All of these changes hope for a better future. Yet more than hope is needed. Economically and sociologically, in housing and health, the condition still of too many Native Americans is appalling. Too many wrongs have yet to be written. Cody lived the American West from 1846 to 1876. Then he took it on the road, the greatest arena extravaganza of all time. It was a romantic adventure, a gilded historical pageant, a combination rodeo and circus. He was, like the nation, he became to symbolize a bundle of contradictions. A hunter who became a conservationist, a friend to Indians who was famed as an Indian fighter, a rugged frontier scout, best remembered as a sequenced showman, a living artifact of a pioneer, past playing out his role of a rapid changing world. Thomas Jefferson's dream of a peaceful merging of the two races was forgotten as greed for land to a policy of separation, removal, and segregation. Ironically, all of the foremost frontiersmen of American history, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Kit Carson, William Cody, sympathized with and defended the Indians, sometimes even while they were fighting them. In time, they came to see that they often had more in common with their native foe than with the people of the East who brought on the conflict. The history of the West is a tale of contradictions and irony. So now, stand at the famous South Pass and watch the procession of civilization as it marched by. The buffalo, the Native Americans, the fur trader, the hunter, the cattle raiser, the pioneer, the immigrant, and the western frontier will pass you by. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to set up a microphone for questions. We're going to set up here in the front. So if you have questions, please don't be bashful. There's no wrong question, only my wrong answer. No, I don't give wrong, hopefully. And if I don't know, I'll tell you. But please feel free to come up to the mic, and in turn, we'll answer your questions about the American West. I paid him $20 to do this. Yes, sir.
We were supposed
That's
to share
it.
that, you know.
Okay.
What was the reason that buffalo bones were collected? What was the value and what was the use for the buffalo bones?
Corsets,
Corsets.
women's corsets, and other, just like whale bones. You know, the whaling, how many of you ever had the pleasure or the displeasure of reading the book Moby Dick? All right. I have a good friend, chairman of the English department. He's retired now at Loyola. I asked him, what is the biggest, best example of American literature? Moby Dick. It was very, it was very symbolic. And there's a huge section on the whaling industry in that book that's very boring. However, at that time, the whaling industry was like AI. It was the going industry of America. And they used whales for everything, whale oil, whale bones, etc. So that's what they used the buffalo bones for, believe it or not. Other questions? Come forward here, because we're recording this for posterity, and then we'll get your question. And if there are others, please feel free to line up behind him.
Can you give us some idea of the rate of population growth in aggregate in the West over a period of time?
Okay. Well, that's hard. That's very hard. But the population growth from after the Civil War to 1890 is the key figure. Because in 1890, the reason they closed, in 1890, the government officially closed the American frontier. Why? Because all the land had been claimed. Now, there were large parts that ultimately were claimed by the government, and most of those, if you drive between here and Phoenix, you can see a whole bunch of it because no one wants it. You know, there are army testing grounds, etc. I really can't give you the aggregate. How I can tell you, however, that by Arizona became, who is from Arizona that's here today? Anyone from Arizona? That's one of the last states to move from being a territory to a state. By 1917 or 1918, all the territories then were states, and they had to have a certain level of population to do that. That's the best I can do. I'm sorry, I can't really give you an accurate figure. But the surge of immigrants from Europe was tremendous during this time period. The railroads advertised in Europe this free, cheap land.
You made reference to a couple of them in your talk, but what would you recommend as good movies to see that accurately depicted the situation in the West? I mean, when I say accurate, better than the, you know.
Okay. I'll tell you what. I have a list here of books that you can read, and they're beautifully written, and they will give you accuracy. Remember, movies are for pleasure. Movies embellish information. I just saw the movie Nuremberg. How many of you saw that movie? All right. I have a whole program on Nuremberg. I've studied Nuremberg. Many of those scenes between the psychiatrist and Goring never happened. All right. They're very interesting, but they did not happen. All right. That movie certainly covers, there are two other movies about it that probably are a little more accurate. One starred Spencer Tracy, and that was a trial of the judges of the Third Reich who operated their court system. And the other was a made-for-television movie that on Nuremberg that covered the whole trial and all the people in it. There were many other interesting aspects of Nuremberg other than just Goring. Goring was very important. But I have watched, my wife will tell you, I have watched too many Western movies. And they all have elements of truth, but, and when John Ford made Cheyenne Autumn, he made it in order to correct some of the myths he had created and she wore a yellow ribbon, Fort Apache, Rear Grand. And those were all shot, most of those, in, how many of you have gone to Monument Valley? Go to Monument Valley. It's beautiful. He hired the Navajo Indians. The Navajos loved him because he used them as extras in all those films. They were very pleased. But is it an accurate portrayal? No, it is not.
Dr. Gordon, you have written a number of books on really diverse topics.
Yes.
Which topic?
I'm a social scientist.
Yeah,
I'm very broadly trained.
Yeah. Which topic do you have the most passion for, and why did you decide to write this book on the American West?
I didn't write a book.
Oh, but
my last book was on D-Day.
Yeah.
How many of you have read Divided on D-Day? That was the last, yes. Many of you have, yes.
So then you've decided you wanted to talk on this topic, but not written a book on it yet. Right?
I have 90 history programs.
Oh, okay. So, all right.
All right.
Do you have
So,
a special area that's particularly interesting to you?
the area that is in most demand at all these museums is World War II. I will give a week from this Saturday at the Palm Springs Air Museum, Killing Hitler, the assassinations that failed to kill a madman. All right? That is the number one. Number two is the Civil War. Next year is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. I have no inquiries regarding that, which I thought I would. I was preparing a program on Yorktown that ended the American Revolution, but I have not had any requests for that yet. I hope I do. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, sir.
I want to hear more about the revolution. Anyway, the United States was in competition with other countries in the Western. I understand the Homestead Act was one reason we did that. Were there to get these areas settled, Oregon?
Okay. Well, really, the Lewis and Clark expedition was more, and some of those other, the Pike, because the idea that ultimately the United States would stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific had some obstacles. Now, our Canadian friends, don't take me wrong here. Oregon, Washington State, particularly Washington State, that the line of demarcation between Canada and the United States was very hazy. And of course, you had the Spanish-American Empire, which included basically all of the Southwest and Texas. Any Texicans, any people from Texas here today? Well, they, of course, were a country before they became part of the U.S., the revolution in Texas. And I have not yet done a program on the Alamo or that battle. But the Lewis and Clark expedition was sent out, and it actually went beyond the Louisiana Territory into area that was disputed with Britain and Spain, all right? So it was the lay markers doing that. And same thing with the fur trading companies and the explorers. And ultimately there were treaties signed between the U.S. and Britain defining the border with Canada. So, after the War of 1812, we didn't try to invade Canada. And I don't think we ever will. Yes. I do a great deal of work. When I received my degrees, I was told while I was getting my doctorate there were 5,000 PhDs in American history driving taxi cabs. That was 1972. That's because all these baby boomers, and I'm a baby boomer, and I wanted to do that. Luckily, I had started a little business in college to earn tuition money that grew into a management consulting firm on workforce development for government and companies in the U.S. At the same time, and I taught in business schools at Loyola and Northwestern. At DePaul, I taught in history and education. So my background is a very broad social science background. I currently sit on the Chicago Federal Reserve Economic Roundtable. So I'm very much involved right now in the whole labor crisis as it is unfolding before us, and other economic issues that are, and I do work with corporations and government on these issues. My first love, though, is history. I'm a historical economist, and I love history, as I think you can tell. And the key to history is very simple. Read. The more you read, the better you're off. Read fiction, but read nonfiction. And there are many beautiful books on the American West that I have a list here. I don't have copies for all of you, but I do have a reading list I'll be happy to give you, and you'll enjoy them. Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you here or at the Palm Springs Air Museum. Thank you.